Shelach. So good morning to everyone. Hope you are well. Hope everyone is taking care of themselves. The host has spotlighted your video. If you're ever, I'm the host. Okay, mute all. So here we go. Pareshat Shelach. Perhaps you got a printout that was sent. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and place it at some point on the screen itself. It's a story that Baruch Hashem, we've heard many, many, many times, and it is about people who were sent on a mission, and they came back with bad news, and there was panic based on the news, which brought about a significant downfall for our ancestors. So that's the tragic story we're going to be reading about this Shabbos. And obviously there has to be some messages that we could take from it. I would like to go ahead and at least start off with a little bit of a different angle. And although we always focus on the negative of these spies, believe it or not, there is actually a way of finding something positive. And this is an approach that's presented by an early 16th century authority, Rabbi Ovadia of Sforno. And that's how we're going to start our discussion. It presents a little bit of a positive twist to the events, and hopefully we could gain a little bit of insight from it. Now, if you look at the first verse, right? Shlach lecha anashim. Nothing is mentioned beforehand, right? In other words, the Torah is not presenting any information regarding an interest and a desire to send spies or messengers before this point. So really the story, the narrative begins with the Almighty, informing Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, shlach lecha nashim, send some people. For what purpose? V'yaturu et eretz Canaan. They should go ahead and tour the land of Canaan. They should go ahead and, as any nation planning a conquest will send a military experts to go ahead and survey the land, so too you should do. Because there's a need. I'm giving to the people of Israel the land of Canaan. So that is how it's presented in this week's Parsha. There's a problem that all the commentators address, and that is that in Chumash Dvarim, where this story is repeated some 39 years later, and it's the next generation. In other words, right, you share stories of things that occurred 39 years ago. Even I can remember things that occurred 39 years ago. So I'm going to share them with you. And the impact perhaps is a little bit different than the way I felt it then. Time changes a perspective, but time cannot change facts. And therefore, what's fascinating is that when 39 years later, Moshe Rabbeinu describes to the next generation the events that took place as they were preparing this early entry into the land of Israel, it's introduced with the words, Vatikrevun elai kulchem. You know, you Jews, you people, your parents actually, they all came close to me, no social distancing, elai kulchem. Vatomru, and they said to me, Nishlecha nashim, you know, Moshe, you want us to go ahead and enter into the land of Israel? We have a good idea, say the representatives of the people of Israel. Let us send forth people. V'yachperu lanu et haaretz. They should dig up information about the land. V'yashivu otanu davar, and let them come back with the information to inform us here in the wilderness how we can make our way into the land. Et haderech asher na'aleba ve'et harim asher navo alem. How do you enter the land? So it is fascinating that in the book of Dvarim, this story is presented not as something that was initiated by God Almighty, but rather something that came forth from the people. It was a demand from the people. We have a need to send messengers. So which one is it? Which one is it? What's taking place here? It's something that commentators struggle with. In addition, this idea of shlach lecha anashim, send for you. This is God talking to Moshe, and he says, send people for you. What does that mean for you? Moshe, poor Moshe is in the middle. Have Rahmanis on the man. The people of Israel are the ones that are pushing him according to the narrative of Dvarim. We need messengers. We need people to go ahead and survey the land. And the way it's presented here, it's the Almighty that's telling him, go ahead, start this process. Shlach lecha anashim. What is this all about? So commentators have different approaches. And the general explanation presented by the commentators is the fact that after the nation made such a demand, the Almighty said, listen, if really they need it, fine, it's okay with me. But you should know there's no need for it. You guys, says God to Moshe, to tell the people of Israel, you really should trust me. I told you it's a good land, right? Can you please just trust me? You really want it? Okay, was ken nechton, the Almighty said, what can I do? I'll let you send forth people, but you should know you're gambling here, because if they don't come back with a good report and the nation panics, you're going to be spending a long time in the wilderness. So that's how the commentators deal with the two approaches. Okay? But what we're going to talk today is an approach that the Sforno presents. And it's a novelty. It's not mentioned by others, and therefore I think it's interesting, but there's a very, very important message here. And it works as follows. You know, Judaism is based on ideals, right? Based on ideals. And it is also based on practices, meaning there's a truth, something I should be doing as a Torah Jew, and that's an ideal, and I gain knowledge by studying the text or turning to my teachers. And then in Judaism, there's the actual practice of Judaism, okay, where I go ahead and I live my life by those values. Now, sometimes I have what is known as a yetzer hara. I have an evil inclination. And there are things that perhaps I shouldn't be doing, but I have this strong urge, and I unfortunately give in to that urge, right? I should never, ever, ever talk negatively about anyone. It's called Lashon Hara. I just simply shouldn't, right? It's a problem. We learned a lot about it at the end of Pareshat Balotcha. We obviously are touching upon it here as well, because these messengers came back with negative information about the land. So unfortunately, I do sometimes, I'm not careful. I think overall I'm careful, but I'm not always careful. Now, when I'm not so careful, I feel guilty a little bit. Right? I'm guilty. I shouldn't have mentioned, I talked about that specific person. I shouldn't have mentioned it. I feel guilty. So how do you deal with guilt? How do you deal with guilt? Any good ideas how to deal with guilt? You drink, I don't know. How do you deal with guilt? So one way is there's a mature way to deal with guilt. Let me tell you how the mature way is the following. I say to myself, listen, you're a good person. You do good things. You made a mistake. Fix the mistake, okay? You're still good. Like, don't eat yourself up. That's the good way of dealing with guilt. Then there's another way of dealing with guilt, and that is to rewrite the truth. How do you rewrite the truth? So imagine there's a group of people sitting together and they're at a gathering, they're schmoozing. And someone mentions that a specific rabbi did something wrong. So someone turns to him and says, that's Lashon Hara. And his response is, no. That rabbi, he's so bad. He's so bad. It's a mitzvah to talk about him Lashon Hara. What exactly has that fellow done? He did perhaps feel some level of guilt or discomfort. So suddenly, he corrupts the truth. In other words, what he is doing is claiming that in this case, the truth indicates that I'm allowed to talk about him. So here we have a far more significant problem, because I am not just practicing an issue and a flaw in behavior. I am corrupting the truth because I don't want to deal with the guilt from my behavior. Okay, and this is a problem that we have to be mindful of. For example, in Yiddishkeit, it's important as Torah Jews to drink kosher wine, meaning it's okay if you don't drink wine, but drinking wine should be kosher. So imagine you have someone that has this very strong desire for specific wines that unfortunately you cannot find in the kosher market. I don't know if such a thing exists or not. So he gives in to his Yetzer Hara. He drinks some wine that's not kosher. So the proper way to deal with it is to recognize it's a weakness. Eventually, I have to overcome it, right? I have to overcome it. When, as children, as a child, my late father, Olav Shalom, used to teach in Or Sameach in Israel. And we had often Friday night guests, students from Or Sameach. And it was an interesting period of time, the early 80s. It was a time you had these Balei Tshuva that would come, some of them with very fascinating backgrounds. And I was always interested, and I remember many of the interactions that occurred. So one of them was from a fellow who became observant, and he noted sitting there at the Shabbos table that before he was Torah observant, he was a wine connoisseur. And he had a collection of hundreds of bottles and of good wines. And remember, this is the 1970s, before we had the explosion in good kosher wines. So at some point, he started learning and he started becoming more Torah observant. And he realized that within a short period of time, he's going to have to walk away from drinking non-kosher wine. But he wasn't ready for it yet. So he realized that I have to start going through my collection. So he noted, I still remember at the Shabbos meal, him describing that he would eat for lunch a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with a fancy wine, because I got to drink it up, because within a couple of weeks or months, I'm going to be fully Torah observant and I'm not going to be able to enjoy it. And he mentioned that he really went through his wines, but he had two very good bottles that he simply didn't feel right just eating it or drinking it on a regular Monday afternoon for lunch. So he saved them. He said the problem is that when I got to them, I already became completely committed. So I had these two high-end bottles of wine that are still sitting there, and I was never able to drink them. Okay? Now, what's the beauty of the story? The beauty of the story is that here is someone that worked through his desire. In other words, he recognized it. There's an ideal to avoid non-kosher wine. I'm not going to change that ideal, but rather I'm going to deal with my desire until I'm ready to go ahead and make the big step. Beautiful story, because he did not corrupt the truth. He did not corrupt the truth. Corrupting the truth would have been that he would have found some kind of opinion from 400 centuries ago that is lenient with wine nowadays, and he would have relied on it. That would be corruption. Corruption is what we don't do. What we do is we recognize that we are humans and we go through the journey. Now, comes the Sforno and he notes the following. The people of Israel, as mentioned in Dvarim, come to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? They bombarded him with emails and WhatsApps, and they say, we're going to the land of Israel, fine. We need to send messengers. We have to figure out the proper way to conquer the land, right? We have to do our ishtadlut, we have to do our part. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu realizes that there's no need for it. God said they're going to go in, and if they left Mitzrayim with miracles in a supernatural way, there's no reason why the entry into the land of Israel cannot be the same. But the nation of Gemach the Meshuggah, they made him nuts. Until the Almighty says to Moshe Rabbeinu, listen here, Moshe Rabbeinu, Shlach lecha nashim. We have to compromise. We have to send people. However, Moshe, says the Almighty, don't let them choose people. Rather, you choose the people among those that they want. In other words, the nation of Israel should go ahead and put forth a long list of people that they feel would be qualified in surveying the land of Canaan. You, Moshe Rabbeinu, choose righteous ones who are not going to corrupt the truth. In other words, notes the Sforno, you should know, when the spies came back, they did not say that the land of Israel is bad. They did not say that it's a land where we Jews should have no interest in. You know what they said? Actually, Banu el haaretz, vegam zavat chalav udvashi. It's a good land. However, they noted that we are petrified because we're going to have to deal with giants. We're going to have to deal with a very powerful population that is present there. But they did not corrupt the truth. They agreed it's a very, very good land, Tovah haaretz. And therefore, notes the Sforno, eventually the nation was able to do tshuva. You know, the nation said, Chatanu, and if I show you in Devarim, right? If you look in Devarim, what does it say? Number one. So again, let's go through the verses that indicate these spies actually did not corrupt the truth. It is zavat chalav udvashi. Vize Piria. The spies came back and said, it's a good land. We're not corrupting the truth. And by the way, says this Sforno, due to the fact that the only problem they had was the panic and the lack of trust that God is going to lead them into that land. Therefore, eventually, the tshuva was doable. And therefore, the nation said eventually, Chatanu, we're wrong. If these spies would have corrupted the truth, if these spies would have come back, and as they are traveling back from Israel, they would be saying to themselves, listen here, there's no way we could conquer this land. There are giants there. There are powerful nations. They're fortified. Forget it. So you know what we're going to do? We're just going to tell the people of Israel that it's not such a good land. We're going to corrupt the truth because we don't have the courage to conquer it. That would have been devastating. There wouldn't have been the opportunity for tshuva. Because when I corrupt the truth, when I think that talking Lashon Hara about so-and-so is a mitzvah, come high holiday season, I'm not going to do tshuva because I felt I was doing a mitzvah, right? That is a problem. That is a major, major problem. If on the other hand, you are presenting the goodness of the land, but mentioning you have fear, yes, there's a sin, but tshuva is possible. Therefore, tells us Sforno, the nation of Israel, as described in Devarim, wanted to send people to survey the land. Moshe Rabbeinu is told by God, Shlach lecha anashim, be sure to choose people who are not going to corrupt the truth. They should be people who recognize the goodness of Israel. Because by having such people who recognize the beauty, the magnificence, the value of Eretz Israel, even if things go wrong, eventually it could be fixed. And they were fixed. It took 40 years, but we got there. And it's our land. And therefore, Shlach lecha anashim, choose people who don't corrupt the facts. Okay? So that's, at least for me, this is a very powerful and magnificent explanation. And it is something that I think of during this period of time. I remember reading a few weeks ago that there is an increase in interest in Aliyah due to the instability that we feel now on this planet. And when Jews feel instability, we turn to Israel. We turn to the land of Israel. And Aliyah is something that many of us have thought, many of us have processed, some of you have actually merited to make it. So for me, it's interesting because a few days ago, they have these websites that you could go on that are what they call Haredi websites. Like there's the Yeshiva World, there's Matzev. So I saw a few days ago that there is a well-known lecturer in the New York area. His name is Rabbi Zecharia Wallerstein. I don't know too much about him, but it seems to be that he's a recognized name, a recognized individual, doing a lot of good things. And Rabbi Wallerstein, in one of his lectures, noted that it's time for Jews in the United States, because he lives there, to make their way to Eretz Yisrael. That's what he said. And obviously, I got it on a WhatsApp very fast from my brother who made Aliyah. I have a brother, my brother Avidan, who lives in the land of Israel, actually, God willing, marrying off his oldest daughter tomorrow night. And I understand that they luckily could have up to 250 people. May they all be healthy after the event. And I would have been there if not for the circumstances. So this brother is a nudge a little bit, because anytime there's anything in the news that has to do with Jews and not being in Eretz Yisrael, he'll post it on the WhatsApp that the family members who did not make Aliyah should feel bad. That's what he loves doing, my beloved brother. So he posted this Zecharia Wallerstein, fine. So I go to the website, and then there's comments on the bottom. And what was interesting for me, is that many of the comments of North American Jews, Torah Jews, Haredi Jews, were, oh, Rabbi Wallerstein, things are not so great in Israel either. They have terrorism there too, right? Israel is controlled by the Tzionim, by the secular Zionists. Why are you making it so important to be there? And for me, such comments, and again, it's obviously a minority, such comments is a corruption of truth. Meaning, if I say, and this is what I do say and I do feel, I know that I should be in the land of Israel. However, if I would have gone into something more practical, like if I would have turned into a plumber or an electrician, I would have been able to do something in Israel. But due to the fact that I'm in an industry that Eretz Yisrael has about the 900,000 people who could do what I do, so therefore I'm stuck in Golus. That's what I feel. But I'm not corrupting the truth, by the way. I know very well that as an ideal, I believe it, I belong in Israel, right? I don't corrupt the truth. On the other hand, I recognize that it's my, call it Yetzer Hara, call it whatever you want, that I'm not in the land of Israel. But those who write such comments are actually corrupting the truth. And it is to such an extent that I'll share with you a story, right? And don't tell anyone. I was once at a rabbinic meeting here in Toronto, right? And maybe perhaps in the 30 years from now, I'll tell you more about my experiences and such things. But I was at a rabbinic meeting. This goes back 2 years ago. And one of the rabbis mentioned that there's some tsaros that existed at the time. They seemed like tsaros because they didn't know what corona is. And so they sent someone to the great Reb Chaim Kanievsky in Bnei Brak for guidance. Reb Chaim Kanievsky is a great Torah leader. He's a Torah leader that his scholarship was recognized already 7 decades ago. So we're dealing with a very, very great Torah scholar. And now in the Haredi communities, he is the guide. He is the Das Torah and well-deserving individual. He's righteous. He's concerned for the people of Israel, concerned for the land of Israel, concerned for the Torah of Israel. So someone from Toronto sent a messenger to Rabbi Kanievsky, guidance, what should we do? We're dealing with some issues here in Chutz La'aretz. And Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky's response was, move to Israel, period. Move to Israel. So this local rabbi heard it, and he was sitting with us, and he said, when I heard it, I was surprised. Well, what does Rabbi Chaim mean? And then he said, and I'll tell you pshat what he means. In other words, I'll explain to you what Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky means. What he means is that we find in our literature that the Torah, that shuls and study halls, Batei Midrash, have sanctity like Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, what Reb Chaim Kanievsky was saying was that we should be more devoted to our shuls and to our Batei Midrash, and that's how we should address the issue. In other words, he used his rabbinic thumb to explain the words that were quite clear. The words were, move to Israel. But now you are basically corrupting the truth because it doesn't fit into the way you are living. That is a problem. That is a problem. And therefore, the message must be, if you're not living in Israel, like myself, remember the importance of the land of Israel. Make it a goal. Make it an ideal. If you are able, if you are not able, fine. That's acceptable. We're not angels. Not everyone can do it. You're still a good Jew. But don't change the truth. And therefore, it was extremely important. The Almighty tells Moshe Rabbeinu, Shlach lecha anashim. Choose people who recognize the goodness of the land, who will come back and say, look at the fruit of the land. Individuals who say it's an Eretz Tova. Because when you choose such individuals and the truth is not corrupted, yes, there's a weakness and a lack of faith that God Almighty will bring us there, that God Almighty will take care of us. Yes, there's a lacking of faith, but when the weakness does not corrupt the truth, tshuva is possible. And therefore they could say chatanu. And therefore at the end, in this week's parsha, we have a group of people that say, you know what, we were wrong. We want to make our way to the land of Israel. That is because the right people were chosen. So this is a very different angle than the traditional one, because we are focusing on the good, but there's also a message. Realize and recognize the goodness of Eretz Israel. So that's part one of our discussion today. Part two is gonna go ahead and talk about wine. Our discussion would relate to wine. Why wine? So you know when Moshe Rabbeinu sends them. He notes, fellers, when you come back, bring some fruit of the land, right? And we have that minhag. Everyone coming back from Israel, it's not legal, obviously, I think, being into Canada, but I wouldn't be surprised if the average person coming back from Israel brought something from Machne Yehuda. That's my guess. That when you come back, you bring something from Machne Yehuda. So they brought something back from the land of Israel, and Moshe Rabbeinu actually hints to them what to bring back. Because the Torah notes that when they left, v'hayamim, and the days, Yemei bikurei anavim, it was when the first grapes ripen. And according to tradition, that was actually the 29th day of Sivan. That's when grapes ripen in Eretz Israel. And when grapes ripen, what would people do on that day? They would crush those grapes. And after crushing dead grapes, according to tradition, it's not considered wine until 40 days pass. 40 days later, wine was ready on the 9th of Tisha B'Av, which is obviously not a coincidence because, as we'll see soon, wine in Judaism is powerful. Wine is very powerful because wine could be used for the good, to make kiddush, right? Wine could be used for the good, to appreciate the world and appreciate the gift that God gave us, physical pleasures. But wine could also be quite destructive, okay? And that's going to be a little bit of the theme that we're going to touch upon. Now, look at the two verses that describe their taking of the vine. So we are told, Vayavo ad Nachal Eshkol, the Israelites, or the 12 spies representing the Jewish people. They arrived until the valley of Eshkol. And what do? Vayichretu, and they cut. Misham zemora, they take a vine. Ve'eshkol anavi mechan, and they take a cluster. And according to tradition, it was a very large cluster. And they had to carry that cluster, vaiseu bemot bishnaim. 2 people had to carry the cluster. According to rabbinic tradition, actually 8 were needed. According to the Ministry of Tourism, if you look at their emblem, it was 2 people. And they also took some pomegranates, and they also took some figs. Fine. Now, Verse 24 is a fascinating one because the Torah tells us that after they did that, La makomahu, that location where the spies took the cluster from, Kara, they called Nachal Eshkol. They called it Nachal Eshkol. Why did they call it the Valley of Eshkol? Al Odot HaEshkol, because of the cluster, Asher Kartu Misham B'nei Israel, that the representatives of Israel, of the Israelites took, which is quite fascinating because it seems to be that the locals who were there called the Nachal Eshkol because of this one-time event that a few tourists took the cluster of grapes, which commentators deal with. Sforna notes that the clusters were so large that when the Israelites arrived, when the spies arrived, they were shocked. And when they took it, they were just amazed. The locals thought it's funny because they were accustomed to such clusters. But for them, the outsiders coming and being so impressed by the size had an impact on them, and therefore they named the location because of the event. Okay, fine. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to share a little a little word on Torah, which is not within the style that we usually work with. In other words, as you know, when you study Chumash, sometimes you'll get an insight that is based on the simple meaning, sometimes based on a rabbinic meaning, and then sometimes you'll hear a gematria, you'll hear a numerical value, which usually I don't go in with that school. However, with this verse, we're going to go ahead and do something that's a little bit different because I think there's a message there. And I'm going to share with you an insight from a rabbi who wrote this in the beginning of the 14th century. His name is Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, known as Rabbi Yaakov Bal HaTurim. He was the author of the Tur. He is the first one that divides halachic literature into the 4 sections that we are familiar with. He was the son of Rabbeinu Asher, the leader of German Jewry who had to escape to Spain. So this rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov, lives in Spain, and he wrote a brief commentary on Chumash that has insight. So here we're going to go ahead and study this verse. Verse 24 notes Rabbi Yaakov Bal HaTurim that this is a verse that starts with the letter Lamed and ends with the letter Lamed. Okay? Is that significant? Okay, it's you could decide on your own if this is considered significant. But here we go. Letter Lamed, Lamakom, right? Lamakom Mahu, to that location, Nachal Eshkol. And it ends with the letter Lamed, B'nei Israel. Okay, it starts with the Lamed and it ends with the Lamed. What's the significance? So he says the following. You know what the Nazir is? A Nazir is a person who feels that unfortunately he is being controlled by his evil inclination. And while nature and the pleasures of the world are supposed to be used to connect us to God, he feels that he is being controlled by these pleasures. So he decides that for a short period of time, he's going to detach from the world and he's not going to enjoy any wine. So such a person is a Nazir. And the Talmud notes that the shortest period of time a person could become a Nazir and the generic period of time a person becomes a Nazir. In other words, if a person declares, I am a Nazir, how long is he going to be a Nazir for if he did not specify a period of time? So the Talmud tells us, Stam Nezirut Shloshim Yom, 30 days. 30 days, fine. What's the numerical value of 30, or what letter represents the number 30? The Lamed. So now this verse, which talks about a cluster of grapes, Lamakoma Ukara Nachal Eshkol, Alodot HaEshkol, these are the first grapes that our ancestors take from the land of Israel, right? Incredible grapes, right? These are the ones that symbolize, right, our connection to the land and realizing that pleasure of Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah. But when it overtakes you, at times there's a necessity to go ahead and detach from it. It has a remez, a hint to the 30 days of the Nazir. And therefore, the verse starts with a lamed, 30 days, and ends with a lamed to remind you of this idea that wine is good, but at times, if it controls you, it's going to destroy you. Okay? Now, on the other hand, the word lamed, in other words, not just the letter lamed, the word lamed means something. Lamed, learn, and lilamed, to teach. Lilmod and lilamed. And the lamed itself, says Rabbi Yaakov Baal HaTurim, refers to this idea that sometimes, if you, let's say you have to go to a gathering, and you're a little bit uptight about that gathering, right? It's a simcha of some relative, you're not so close to them, you're a little bit uptight. You walk in, you're not feeling totally comfortable. So the waitress passes with the tray, and they have some good red wine, a good Merlot or a good Cabernet, obviously from Israel. You take it, you make a Bora Priya Gofen, you drink it. At times, those few ounces could do a tremendous amount of good. It removes the edge, and suddenly you're more relaxed, you're more friendly, right? You can be kind. And by the way, there's even a statement in the Talmud that when a person drinks a little bit of wine, it makes him pikach, it makes him wise. What other rabbis tell us? To drink wine to teach? Actually, there's a question if you could paskin when you teach. That's true. But sometimes you need something to remove the edge, because my goal is to teach. My goal is to interact. My goal is to be kind to others. My goal is to uplift people and uplift humanity. Sometimes I feel a little bit of a roughness. The wine is the most incredible tool. And when I drink that little bit of wine and I'm relaxed, and I could learn Torah, I could learn about people, how to uplift them, I can inspire them. Wine gives you the ability, lilmod ulilamed. Wine relates to lamed. And therefore, he notes the verse starts with a lamed, ends with a lamed, lilamed, because wine could be used for the good. And therefore, in this powerful verse, and by the way, Israel and the land of Israel and wine always are mentioned together. You know that in Pareshat Vayechi, when the Torah describes the blessing of Yaakov Avinu to his children, and he gets to Yehuda, and there's references there to King David and the future Messiah, and to an era when we return to as Israel. So Yaakov has a vision where Osri Lagefen Ira, that we're going to go ahead and tie a donkey to a vine, because you're going to be loading a lot of grapes to produce wine. The production of wine has always been understood as a symbol of the greatness of the land of Israel, because when used right, it does incredible things. And I've mentioned this many, many times, that the idea that for the past few decades, Israel is producing magnificent wine, right? When 40 years ago, you all know that when you would say kosher wine, you would think about Menashevitz, Hashem Yerachem. That was what wine was. And today, right, when you think about wine, you think about a good Dalton or a good Tepperberg, or if you can afford it, a good Castel or a good Yatir, right? And the list goes on and on. Israel is producing good wine. What we should be doing is recognizing that is telling us, Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying, Israel is having this incredible comeback, right? Be part of it. And if you can't be there, at least always buy the wine from Israel, make a bracha and appreciate it, because that wine can remove the edge, and that wine can make you connect to others and uplift the spirit of others, and can give you the ability, lamed, lilmod ulilamed. That is what he reads into this very, very powerful verse. And if Tisha B'Av is the day that wine is ready, Tisha B'Av is a unique day. It's a day of mourning because we misuse the wine, right? In other words, our ancestors in the land of Israel had all the blessings, but unfortunately, they became addicted to them, and they forgot that these are tools to connect the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We, Baruch Hashem, are in a generation that we are realizing that this is a gift from above. You go ahead and have the wine, and it's not just wine. It could be anything that comes from the land of Israel, and really anything that is created in the planet that gives pleasure to the human, right? That makes me feel good. If it does not control me, as my father would always note, that like chocolate, for example, right? I like a good dark chocolate. If I control it, that's good. Meaning if I'm able to eat only one piece, make the bracha, appreciate the Almighty, but I'm in control of it, that's good. If the chocolate controls me, I have a problem. Chocolate control means that I take one piece and then I eat all of it. And then I have too much sugar in my system and I have a crash. And then I'm down. And then I'm upset. That is called chocolate controlling you. Then you have to address the issue. You have a problem. But when you are in control and you use physical pleasure for the good, that is incredible. And that's when Tisha B'Av, the day that wine is ready, that is when Tisha B'Av is going to turn into a Yom Tov. When we learn to master the world and use it for good. And, it's throughout the ages, people have always tried to predict when the Messiah is going to come. This is a problem that goes back already centuries. There are verses in Daniel, the book of Daniel, where he has a vision of when, the Messianic era is going to occur. And everyone has tried to predict it, and what's the common denominator to all those who tried to predict when the Messianic era is going to occur is that they were all wrong, because everyone came up with their own dates. So the Talmud actually notes that if you are looking for signs, the greatest sign of all is when the land of Israel will produce fruits, when the land of Israel will create an abundance. And obviously, we are experiencing it. And obviously, I see that as another nudge. Make your way to Eretz Yisrael, right? Go ahead. Consider it valuable. And if you're not making it to Eretz Yisrael, at least don't corrupt the truth of the value of Eretz Yisrael, right? Recognize we don't belong here. And when we see the instability, right, south of the border, and, so I got an email that someone read through the whole platform of these Black Lives Matter. And there are some references to that just as the blacks in North America are suffering, the same is occurring with the Palestinians that are suffering. The instability is not something we celebrate, and there should be a level of concern. We can still pray that things do stabilize. We pray for the welfare of governments, right? We hope for better things somehow, but the instability is a reminder that we don't technically belong here. If we have to, we have to, but let's not change the fact that Eretz Yisrael is a wonderful land. Eretz Yisrael is a gift. Eretz Yisrael is a land where the wine connects us to our Creator. Okay, so what we're, let me just, I think I have to unmute a few people. Hold on one second.
You can't see anything.
Okay, so that's what we have a little bit from this extended Parsha. In the past, we've had the opportunity to actually focus also on the Ma'apilim, the people who decided to nevertheless make their way to the top of the mountain. After Moshe Rabbeinu says, guys, we're stuck here, we're not going anywhere, we're spending the next 40 years in the wilderness, there's a group called the Ma'apilim, but we're not going to go through it now. Perhaps one of the videos at some point this week, we'll have the opportunity to go ahead and address. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We're going to unmute everyone. If you do have questions, we'll see what chat comments exist. So we're going to, number one, end the